We're honored to have Jim McNerney as our speaker this evening. Throughout his career across a variety of industries, Jim has fostered corporate cultures that equally emphasize integrity and performance, creativity and discipline, growth and productivity, all underpinned by his enduring commitment to leadership development. Jim now leads Boeing, the world's #1 aerospace company and a leading U.S. exporter. During nearly 9 years at the helm, he has sharpened his team's focus on innovation that brings value to customers and operational excellence that rewards stakeholders and fuels the future. Under Jim's leadership, Boeing's top-line revenue has grown from nearly $55 billion in 2005 to more than $86 billion in 2013. The company's 5-year cumulative return to shareholders significantly outpaced the broader S&P 500 index and its aerospace and defense index. With 169,000 employees across the United States and in 65 countries, Boeing is the world's leading manufacturer of commercial airplanes, military aircraft, and defense, space, and security systems. Boeing also supports airlines and U.S. and allied government customers in more than 150 nations. At a national and global level, Jim's constructive, nonpartisan engagement and advocacy have helped advance fiscal trade policy during times of partisan gridlock. As chairman of the President's Export Council since 2010, Jim has advocated for U.S. policies that both enable and strengthen free and fair trade on a level global playing field. From 2011 through 2013, Jim served as chairman of the Business Roundtable, an association of CEOs of leading U.S. companies. During this time, he acted as a sounding board to leaders of both political parties while steering the Roundtable's advocacy for U.S. economic expansion and job creation through comprehensive pro-growth tax reform, regulatory reform, education, and job training improvements, and smarter immigration policies. In addition, he serves on the boards of Procter & Gamble and IBM. Many may not know, but Jim is truly a homegrown Chicagoan. Although born in Rhode Island, Jim graduated from New Trier High School in Winnetka. And sports have always been an important part of the McNerney life. And growing up, Jim played as a center in hockey, a center in football, and in baseball as a pitcher. Jim even went on to play baseball at Yale. Do they have, yep, oh, his picture, a couple of pictures from those days up on the screen here. After getting his MBA from Harvard, Jim began a long and successful career, starting with Procter & Gamble, then at McKinsey, and finally at GE, where he thrived under mentorship from Jack Welch. He left GE for 3M and is now having an impressive run leading Boeing. Before we give Jim a chance to speak, let's take a look back at Boeing from when it was founded 98 years ago to the company it is today.
It's been here from the very beginning. The vision, the focus, the passion. Not just to build something new or something different, but to build something better, to exceed expectations, to set new and higher standards, to expand the potential of what is and transform what could be into reality. Year after year, generation after generation, innovation after innovation, the passion and principles remain the same. To build something smarter, something stronger, something lighter, something faster, something safer, something greener, something bolder. To build something better for today, for tomorrow, for generations to come.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Jim McNerney.
Thanks very much. That introduction was so good, I thought for a minute you worked for me. That was... Guys, take note. That's how you introduce me, okay? It's great to be here, and thanks to the leadership of the Economic Club. I had no idea it was so vast and deep, and so many of you. I've got customers, I've got suppliers that are part of this group. I've got to be on my good behavior. I'll do my best. But it is an honor to be among those who have addressed this storied institution, including, I'm told, 5 of the last 7 U.S. presidents. John and I, we didn't talk about the 2 you didn't get, but that's something for another. I hesitated for a minute when I discovered the yield wasn't quite as good as it could have been, but it's... Just a word about the items at your tables. The pen and pencil set at each place setting is made with the same stuff we make the Dreamliner out of, basic carbon composite that makes up actually 50% of the structure of that airplane, is what gives it a lot of its performance. We couldn't arrange to have a plane fly over tonight, but we did fly these smaller planes on your table, and I was interested to hear that tenure, while unimportant in most organizations, and John and I were having a debate about that in educational institutions up here at the dais, but evidently it is important if you want to get your hands on a Dreamliner. So if you can prove that you're the longest running commercial club member, the economic club member, I should say, the plane is yours. Ties, give us a call, we'll help, we'll see what we can do. Listen, it has been 9 years since I came to Boeing, 9 years this summer actually, and an opportunity, even though I had spent a fair amount of time in the aerospace industry. You saw in the video what attracted me to this company, and it also was a chance to return to Chicago, where I had spent some of my formative years, a few of which I can tell you about. In fact, about a year ago, I attended a New Trier High School alumni event that honored, among others, the novelist Scott Turow, cosmetics pioneer Bobby Brown. It was just another reminder that being a New Trier graduate provides a good check on the ego when you consider who occupies the ranks of fellow alumni, from Anne Margaret to Charlton Heston to shrinking violets like Don Rumsfeld and our current mayor, Mr. Emanuel. Boeing, as you may recall, relocated its corporate offices to Chicago in 2001. It's hard to believe that that's been 13 years, but it's been 13 years. The company at that stage had grown through a series of acquisitions and a big merger with McDonnell Douglas. And one of the many that produced all the products you saw in the videos, and one of the many advantages that made Chicago attractive was a central location, strategically placed to oversee our major operations all around the United States at this stage. Chicago was also appealing because it provided a global transportation hub, a skilled and diverse workforce, plus a welcoming and entrepreneurial spirit, all attributes still very much in play today and reflected in the gathering here tonight. These attributes are also reflected in Mayor Emanuel's plan for economic growth and jobs in this city, a plan which draws on the lessons learned from municipalities around the world, best practices, so to speak, to create an environment in which businesses can flourish, whether in advanced manufacturing, more targeted job training, transportation infrastructure, and entrepreneurship generally. Indeed, much of Chicago's recent history underscores the main theme of my remarks tonight: how the public and private sectors can more effectively work together, move this country, move this city to new heights of global competitiveness. I've long believed that when certain things are done right, American business and government actually complement one another. Businesses make the investments, take the risks that propel economic growth and job creation. Government helps create the environment through appropriate public investments, tax policies, and the regulatory climate in which businesses can innovate and compete. This approach fueled prosperity for multiple generations of Americans, produced the world's biggest and most dynamic economy, and sustained a large and growing middle class. But like many of you in this room, I am very concerned that this country seems to be veering further and further from that model today. We have no choice in our respective industries and as a country but to correct and deal with this issue. The realities of the global marketplace demand it, as the business leaders here today know all too well in your own companies. From a Boeing perspective, the competitive environment we face is dramatically different from the one which our country grew to prominence over much of the last century. For example, in the commercial airplane market, for decades now, we have competed primarily with one region and one company, Western Europe and Airbus. Today, we are preparing for a number of new competitors from emerging economies and rising powers. China is the obvious example. Meanwhile, our customers, and probably yours, are demanding more capability, more efficiency, more quality, more reliability, all for less money. In aerospace, that's to contend with persistently high fuel prices and stiffer global competition in commercial aviation, and to stretch declining budgets in our traditional defense, space, and security markets. Now, these fiscal and competitive challenges are significant, but so are the opportunities for growth. We estimate that over the next 20 years, the market for commercial airplanes will reach some 35,000 planes worth, which is worth $5 trillion. And naturally enough, Boeing wants to build and sell as many of those airplanes as possible. Today, about 80% of our commercial airplane sales go to customers outside the United States, 80%. And nearly 30%, and this will surprise some people in the room, 30% of our defense and space sales are to international customers. That's up from about 7% 5 years ago. And the products we offer, such as the 787, are well matched to the needs of today's global aviation customers. But to be sure, other companies and countries are going to challenge us every step of the way. Ultimately, the unrelenting reality of this global economy is that business is earned, and jobs are created and sustained primarily through increasing competitiveness and innovation. And over time, the most successful businesses and the most plentiful sources of jobs will be in those regions where business conditions support rather than impede those two driving forces. This dynamic is true everywhere, none more so than in manufacturing. It's no accident that the tagline featured in tonight's video is "Build Something Better," which echoes the words of our founder, Bill Boeing, after he hitched his first ride on the cloth wing of a float plane in 1914 and decided, hey, I can build a better one. When you hear people lament that we don't build things anymore in this country, unquote, consider that today Boeing alone employs more than 160,000 people across the U.S., most of them in the business of building things, designing things, or supporting those who do. That's not counting the 1.5 million jobs at more than 15,000 U.S. supplier partners of everything from airplane parts to supercomputing powered, and as I learned today, some pretty good-sized forgings from some friends here in Illinois. At Boeing, we never gave up on American manufacturing, and we continue to invest heavily in domestic production. Our 787 facility in South Carolina, the first new airplane factory built in America in nearly 5 decades, is a great example. We also have capacity expansions underway in Utah, Montana, and Washington State. As the top U.S. exporter with $49 billion in international sales last year, Boeing contributes a lion's share of this country's more than $72 billion positive balance of trade in the aerospace sector, which is, as measured by the relationship between imports and exports, the most globally competitive segment of the United States economy. Other U.S. manufacturing sectors also are positioned for sustained recovery and expansion. One factor behind that is that wages in the major consumer manufacturing centers overseas have been rising. So the business case for locating production outside of the United States is no longer as compelling as it once may have been. Whether it's Apple, GE, Ford, or Motorola, reports of insourcing decisions are on the rise. Furthermore, American manufacturing, as well as the U.S. economy in general, should benefit from the dramatic increase in new domestic energy discoveries. According to the International Energy Agency, by the 2020s, the U.S. will become the world's largest global oil producer. Combined with greater efficiency, more widespread use of alternative fuels, and conservation, the effect could be substantially lower energy costs and make the United States dramatically more competitive for locating manufacturing and production operations. Now, we're not going to recreate the American industrial footprint of decades of the past. Our competitive edge will reside higher up the value chain at the more advanced segments of manufacturing for products that require a high degree of design, engineering, and technical skills. This is why Illinois-based manufacturing firms such as Caterpillar, also one of America's top exporters, should continue to thrive in the global competitive environment. And that is why efforts such as the recently announced UI Digital Lab for Manufacturing here in Chicago are so important to sustain America's competitive edge in manufacturing into the future. Remember, while manufacturing remains a relatively small share of the U.S. economy, probably around 20%, at least compared to 50 or 60 years ago, it has a disproportionate impact on overall job growth because of the economic ecosystem and footprint that surrounds it, from engineering services to supply chains to service elements that service in-place stuff, which now brings us to the role of public, as I promised, of public policy in creating an environment that allows American business to innovate, build, grow, and hire. Even if a company does almost everything right in productivity, innovation, and execution, we do not, as we've learned over the last 7 or 8 years, operate in splendid isolation. Our fortunes are heavily influenced by the wider macroeconomic, geopolitical, and public policy context in which government actions or inaction can make a profound difference. In recent years, the record of the U.S. government, executive and legislative branches alike, has been mixed. Decisive action by the Congress, the President, and the Federal Reserve helped avert an economic catastrophe just over 6 years ago. Get credit for that. But America's political establishment has been much less effective when it comes to setting the conditions for a stronger, sustained recovery that boosts jobs and incomes across all groups. A major culprit has been the type of partisan gridlock that led to a government shutdown last fall. Before that, we faced, and will face again, the imposition of deep and indiscriminate budget cuts across every category of discretionary spending. This so-called sequestration has the potential to do real damage to our military readiness at a time when the world is not getting any safer, critical investment accounts, and other important functions of government, say the FAA, for example, something that Jeff and I care a lot about. In December, the Bipartisan Budget Act provided some welcome, though limited and very temporary relief from sequestration's worst effects. But according to current law, the sequester mechanism will be re-triggered in fiscal year 2016. That's not very far away. Overall, paralysis in the U.S. political system has fueled uncertainty about the future, which, as you well know, further discourages businesses from making the kind of long-term investments that produced sustained innovation and significant hiring. But if you look past the ideological food fights, within the center-left to center-right spectrum, there is broad agreement on the basics. More trade and freer trade on a level playing field. Not too many people argue with that anywhere near the center of the political spectrum. A more sensible immigration policy, especially with respect to highly skilled workers in science and technology. That's how we built this country. And a simpler, transparent, and more competitive tax code. Free trade agreements, or FTAs, are often controversial and get drawn into the crossfire of domestic politics. The U.S. Trade Representative is currently negotiating ambitious regional trade agreements in Europe and Asia, which make up more than 70% of the world's population, who are potential customers for U.S. goods and services. As many here already know, the effect of the FTAs is to level the playing field with competitors who already, in most cases, are exporting goods to the U.S. under favorable terms. The operative change with the FTAs is to give American exports the same access that we've been giving those nations and that they've enjoyed with the U.S. all along. That's often not discussed, but that is 80% of the dynamic. The results do not just benefit big manufacturers like Boeing and Caterpillar and the thousands of companies in their respective supply chain. 98% of U.S. exports are small businesses, and new trade partnerships mean more business and more jobs. That's why industries across the country have been pressing our government to conclude additional agreements, including the aforementioned Trans-Pacific Partnership. This trade pact has been in the works for nearly a decade and would more closely align the economies of the U.S., Canada, Japan, Mexico, and 8 other countries in South America and Asia, covering about 40% of all American trade activity. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimates that the TPP would generate nearly $80 billion in additional income annually for the U.S. Unfortunately, difficult issues are still being negotiated, and a number of factors are converging that may prevent the deal from being completed. That's sort of real time, but it's always darkest before the dawn in these kinds of deals. Uncertainty around the passage of Trade Promotion Authority for the President is one issue casting a long shadow across the negotiations. In other words, we're not going to get real negotiations with partners who don't think that the President has the stick to get it done back in the Congress, so they'll withhold their best deal until he gets that. I would urge all of us in that light to call upon members of Congress to approve Trade Promotion Authority and to help break the logjam on FTAs. I know at Boeing and a lot of other places we're spending a lot of time on that issue. At its core, trade is a policy issue on which business, labor, and government leaders can and should come together for mutual benefit. Expanded trade, as we all know, means expanded opportunities for everyone, although it must be governed by a strong set of rules that are rigorously enforced. Indeed, Boeing is still confronting the reality that the global market for aerospace products, from passenger jets to satellites, is often not a level playing field. Our sector doesn't just compete against companies from other nations. We often are competing against other governments as well. For starters, European governments provide substantial financial support for European aerospace companies, most notably the $18 billion in so-called launch aid and other subsidies for Airbus, which have been recently ruled illegal by the World Trade Organization, and without which the WTO has said Airbus might not exist today. Newer players in aerospace in Asia and in South America also provide significant public support for their emerging aviation sectors, in addition to export credit guarantees to help their domestic industries. That's one reason why, and I'm going to get on my soapbox now, why Congress must reauthorize the U.S. Export-Import Bank. The Ex-Im Bank is the federal agency that provides loan guarantees to foreign entities for the purchase of American goods, typically in emerging regions where private financing is inadequate or unavailable. It is governed by a multilateral treaty which ensures that the global playing field for this type of loan support, which most major economies participate in, remains level. This is an important business issue for Boeing and many thousands of large and small businesses. Historically, Congress reauthorized the bank's charter without fanfare, often by unanimous consent, but no more. Despite core support from both parties and a recommendation from the President, and reflecting Washington's political divisiveness, some in Congress see the bank as unnecessary and want us to shut it down. Throw in a cottage industry of misinformation and misrepresentation, as from the usual places, the far right and the far left. We have a political food fight over a government agency that actually makes money, reduces the deficit, and supports 2 million American jobs annually across all 50 states. You did hear that right. Ex-Im earns a profit from the fees it charges and pays dividends to the Treasury. $2 billion worth of dividends over the past 2 years. It costs taxpayers nothing and often makes the difference between a U.S. company winning or losing an order to a foreign company armed with export credit guarantees from their home countries. There are some in my industry who argue that Ex-Im guarantees on airplane sales provide foreign airlines a cost advantage over U.S. airlines. This is an important business issue for Boeing. We were talking about Ex-Im Bank. Discarding this important tool for U.S. exporters would be tantamount to unilateral disarmament and result in thousands of American jobs lost and damage our reputation abroad. In its lead editorial on Monday, Europe's Financial Times, of all places, described Ex-Im as a vital plank in U.S. economic engagement, and it cited any Ex-Im delay in Congress as harming America and harming the rest of the world. What that means is that if this orderly treaty arrangement between countries were to be disbanded, a free-for-all would basically ensue, where subsidization would creep into the funding of aerospace products, and things like innovation, cost, and value would no longer be the discriminators. In the meantime, however, governments can do their part by helping businesses hire, train, and recruit people with the skills they need, regardless of nationality. I know this is an issue of special resonance in the Chicago area, which has a long history of immigrant integration and success. Even today, 20% of this region's population was born outside the United States, contributing to the city's diversity and dynamism. You just have to look at the roster of tonight's attendees, and you can see that. We all can be proud that the world's brightest math and science students flock to American universities. Yet too often, students who would rather stay in the U.S. get sent home after graduation to use what they've just learned to help overseas competitors succeed, and in some cases at our company's expense. Stepping back from all the rhetoric for just a minute, attracting and assimilating aspiring individuals is a unique American advantage, given our culture and our history, and we seem to be giving it up for no good reason. Along with it, we are giving up a 3.3% increase in real GDP by 2023, as projected by the Congressional Budget Office's scoring of the bipartisan Senate immigration reform bill. That's roughly $700 billion in additional economic activity, and that, in turn, doubles in the following decade. So even though prospects for passing immigration reform this year have dimmed for all the usual reasons, businesses must continue to urge elected officials to break the legislative impasse and unlock this massive opportunity for growth and increased competitiveness. There is no single thing that can get done that can change the growth rate of this country more than that. Finally, tax. A general consensus is also emerging, again, the center of the political spectrum, that an overhaul of the U.S. tax system is very long overdue. In the quarter century since the last major reforms were enacted, America's tax code has swollen in size and complexity, becoming significantly less competitive in the global economy. At 39%, which is a combination of 35% federal and the average state tax, the U.S. currently has the highest statutory corporate tax rate amongst all members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, essentially the developed world, a full 10 percentage points above the average of those countries, and these are the countries we compete with. While many of our trading partners are lowering their respective rates and aggressively modernizing their corporate tax codes to attract businesses and corporate headquarters, the U.S. has yet to follow suit. We can no longer afford to be on the sidelines, in my view. Some 15 months ago, a number of us got together in other major U.S. corporations in providing congressional committees with several proposals to overhaul the U.S. tax system. The first was to significantly reduce, 35 to 25 kind of reduction. I know that's not exactly a shock from the U.S. business community, but that was our first recommendation. But the more surprising recommendation we met, the man bites dog aspect of our recommendation, I should say, entailed a willingness to give up virtually all of a very large number of very beneficial tax preferences in exchange for achieving the broader goal of a lower tax rate. Now, not everybody went to that table feeling great, but the American business community, by and large, came together on that. The Senate Finance Committee leadership, Max Baucus, Republican Orrin Hatch, followed with a clean slate proposal, no loopholes, no deductions or credits of any kind. David Camp of Michigan, House Ways and Means Committee chairman, outgoing, also put forth a bold plan that lowered corporate tax rates and broadened the overall revenue base. Despite these, when you look at the environment in Washington, pretty courageous bipartisan efforts by committee leadership, neither proposal gained traction with their colleagues or with their caucus leaders in particular. They tend to be the more extreme crowd. Today, Senator Baucus is ambassador to China. Representative Camp has announced his retirement, joining a number of other pragmatists and bridge builders, and I don't want to characterize Camp's departure in this way, but there are those who just are sick and tired of the whole deal. And of course, 2014 is an election year, which makes it a natural time for these things to happen. We've got to keep making the case for tax reform. We are non-competitive. Everybody agrees except the extreme sides of the parties. But in politics, you got to believe that eventually there's going to be some sun shining and an opportunity to make this happen on all three of these issues: trade, immigration, and tax. Those three things will make a big difference and allow the government to do their job as part of the equation that produces the growth we need. I do remain, and I'll close now. I did find the page that has my closing remarks on it. More of this was winged than you know. Despite the magnitude and complexity of the issues I've touched on tonight, I do, like many in this room, remain profoundly optimistic about the future of American innovation, our global competitiveness, and economic leadership. At the end of the day, we are a pragmatic people. Eventually, we do get it right, the famous Winston Churchill quote, to paraphrase, after we virtually exhaust all other options first. If our elected officials can rediscover the ability to mix democracy and effective governing, I know that American business will be there once again to unleash our true economic potential and provide sustained prosperity for generations to come. Thanks very much, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Start with the easy, hard question. What do you think happened with the Malaysian flight? And more importantly, what can governments and plane manufacturers do to prevent similar tragedies in the future?
Well, the truth is that no one knows what happened to it. What it looks like is some kind of purposeful action on the plane. Exactly what, nobody knows. There's a lot of data out there from a number of sources that have produced no conclusive answer. I know there's widespread speculation that governments, for some reasons or another, are withholding information or are less transparent than they should be. My experience with regulators in these kind of situations is that they are trying very hard. They're dealing with multiple sources of information that are often generated from perspectives that are somewhat less than objective, and they're trying hard. And we are asked to support from time to time, and we're supporting all that we can on the technical side. It's a mystery. It's a tough one.
Are there things we can do, that plane manufacturers or governments could do going forward to prevent this?
Well, I think, the kinds of proposals that are bandied about have to do with real-time tracking, perhaps a third transponder in the airplane, which could look up and look down, that cannot be turned off, that will provide data. But I think we're a long way from the regulators providing a concrete recommendation. But you can imagine some kind of recommendation coming out of something as heart-rendering as this one.
Let's talk a little bit just about competition in the industry. And you touched on, in your remarks, about the 787 in terms of its use of composites, its use of new electronics. You also, another angle, touched on the competition that you increasingly face from Asian and South American competitors who are government-backed in some fashion. What do those kinds of changes mean for the future of the commercial aviation industry?
Well, I mean, there's a lot in that question. Technology, governments. Look, I mean, the aerospace industry is one that has a big technical and manufacturing footprint in any country it competes in. That's one of the reasons people want to be in it. And governments often support the growth of this industry, often from a standing start. I mean, China is a good example. I mean, China has the capital. They have the related military technology. They have the engineering capability. And they have a government with a lot of money. And that combination makes it difficult to compete. So you've got to fight for some of the rules-based international cooperation. But the big thing you have to do is produce the most innovative airplanes. That is, at the end of the day, the basis for competition in our business is help Jeff Smizak run a more productive airline. And if we can convince him that we've deployed the technology in a way that's most effective, he'll look around. In most cases, Jeff, he'll look around some of the other kinds of incentives that offer short-term kind of benefit, but offer less long-term benefit to him.
So even against the backdrop of essentially government support in Asia, South America, you think you can compete from a global world-class manufacturing standpoint, even against essentially countries that have far greater resources?
Yeah, well, they have far greater resources dedicated to supporting the industry. I think the answer is yes. We feel very comfortable competing, and the way we'll compete is to out-innovate them. And that's why we take chances on 787s, which is a suite of new technologies that was part of a troubled development, but it was a very compelling airplane that we ended up building. And as long as our basis for competition remains that, I think we can win. Subsidies have a negative impact, by the way, on competitors in that airplanes can get built for politicians, not customers. And so we stay focused on customers and we stay focused on technology. So I like our chances.
Looking for a minute at your defense business, and we're obviously experiencing a military drawdown and slim down of military operations. How's that going to affect your business model?
Well, I think it actually highlights the strength of our business model in the sense that we have a very big commercial business, which is probably 60 to 65% of the company. And the defense business will be entering, I think, a flattening growth. U.S. may actually be down a little bit, offset by international sales. But we can grow the company through our commercial business over the next 5 to 7 years and manage responsibly the defense business, not take too much risk, manage to produce the kind of margins that our investors expect. And so the fact that we're diversified really helps us in this kind of an environment, because it will be tough.
So, again, so within the defense business, I mean, you are one of the larger defense companies in the world. You're an important partner of the United States and for our defense strategy. And you've also been a target of potential terrorism. And the rumor has it that you personally have been on al-Qaeda's hit list. How does Boeing combat these kinds of threats? I mean, and what impact does this have on your business or your competitiveness when you kind of face these kind of threats?
Well, you know, if you utter a statement in my job that threats are things that have to be dealt with and therefore businesses are created to deal with them, that often doesn't sound right, okay? But we do live in a world that is unstable, increasingly unstable, where people are taking more risks geopolitically. You can look at Asia, you can look in Ukraine, you can look at a lot in the Middle East. And so there are going to be conflicts. Now, every country has to decide how they're going to deal with it, and it's a political judgment. So I think we're not an independent variable here, we're a dependent variable. But I think this is just one person talking. I think you're going to see a more threat-based, more unstable world in front of us. And I think a big policy question and political question is how the United States will participate in dealing with that instability. And will there be a world order that produces stability of one sort or another? I mean, the policeman of the world is one model that produces stability. Then you've got other models where everybody cancels everybody out, balance of power kind of models. So we got some big decisions as a country in front of us.
Right, so depending on where that goes, that's got to have an impact on your business. How do you?
Yeah.
And it's uncertain, so how do you plan for that level of uncertainty?
Well, you stay close to your customers, obviously, but it's, look, I think my take is that notwithstanding that the developed world is allocating somewhat less for their national defense, I think it will be an unstable world. I think those two things, one will move one way, one will move the other, and I think we'll have a flat market, and I think we know the kinds of systems that are going to be needed.
Also looking at impacts on your business, you mentioned during your talk that obviously oil production up in the U.S. and the potential for significant increases going forward in U.S. oil production, and potentially an impact on oil prices in a downward direction, which a lot of people might think is good. How does that, though, impact your business?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I mean, I think one of the things that's driving our commercial business now in the sale of this airplane is high oil prices. And because this plane costs more than the one it replaces, but the payback in a higher oil price environment is very, very fast. I mean, this burns 20% less gas per mile than the one it replaces. So that pays back in a hurry when oil's at $100 or $110. So if oil's down to 30, you could argue that would have a negative impact on some of it. The airlines would limp along with current technology planes not needing doing so. On the other hand, it would produce economic growth. And the economic growth would produce more flyers and more need to move people around. So how those two things would offset, it's hard to know. I think at the end of the day, I think I'd rather have slightly lower prices that favor economic growth in general than I would high oil prices that favor a certain segment of my airplane assortment.
So you just touched on the 787, obviously bringing that to market and the impact that has. That involved a huge global supply chain, unprecedented in the airline industry. What lessons did you learn process-wise in terms of global product, global sourcing?
How much time do you have?
According to that, we
You got plenty of time. Is the time up yet? I was hopefully that question was at the bottom of your stack. No, actually, we learned a lot. I mean, I think every industry goes through a version of creating too horizontal a business model. And what they lose the handle on are the fundamental things, which are quality, delivery, and cost. Ultimately, that's what customers are buying from you. And that's what we lost the handle on. And it's a very seductive model. Looks good on paper. We overestimated our ability to manage a widely distributed. We gave them more engineering to do than we typically do, as opposed to just build for print. That caused some problems. We were enamored with new design tools that were going to integrate all kinds of different engineering input, which turned out to be kludgier than we'd first thought. And so it was, and we misunderstood the maturity of some of the key technologies that we were dealing with. So we were faced with some invention along the way, which is when you get into these big development programs, if you're still inventing, it's billions of dollars later before you stop. And so we learned a lot of lessons, and it's, in our industry, learning the mistake of the too horizontal business model is more expensive than in most industries. So we've gotten religion. It was an important thing for us to go through, and it's made us much more disciplined in our development going forward.
So where does that take your manufacturing going forward? You've had, in the past history, you've had labor unrest, obviously, in the U.S. You've got Airbus coming to the U.S. from a manufacturing standpoint. Are we going to see more Boeing investment in right-to-work states? Are we going to see more manufacturing outside the U.S.? How are we going to see that manufacturing change in the future?
Well, I think the controlling point is that we're a company with a lot of different products, all with common underlying technologies and common underlying manufacturing processes. And so the question becomes, how do you best leverage centers of excellence? How do you best distribute risk while still having economically sized sites and programs to deliver things? And that's a strategic question we hadn't really asked. I mean, we'd been in Seattle for years and years, and all of a sudden we found ourselves all across the U.S. after the Rockwell Hughes and McDonnell Douglas assimilations. And we've been asking those questions in a hard-edged way over the last 6 or 7 years, which has produced an answer, which is centers of engineering excellence in a number of different places, some outside the U.S., some inside the U.S. Manufacturing is still largely in the U.S., but a lot of sourcing arrangements around the globe. We've reined some of that in after the 787 experience. So we're trying to figure out what the best infrastructure, both technical and manufacturing, is for a $150 billion company from the $100 billion company we are today. And so we're trying to size it that way. And it's caused a lot of change, and but it's against leverage, risk reduction, and hoarding of expertise in the right kind of places. Not unlike the kinds of questions everybody in this room asks when they're trying to sort out their business as it goes through stages of growth.
Do we have the engineering talent in the U.S. that we need to continue?
It's a very good question. We do not have enough. I think companies with big brand names like ours, we can find all the engineers we need, okay? But it's more down in our supply chain where the engineering is just as difficult, if not more difficult. It is in medium tech manufacturing. These are the folks that are having trouble finding the engineers or spending an inordinate amount of time training them once they dig them up, or just people, the physical readiness of people to move into factories in our country, it would shock you. Physical readiness, okay? Used to take us 2 weeks to get someone into our factories and to teach them a basic assembly job. And none of that was, hey, you got to get in shape. Now it takes 12 weeks, 10 weeks of which is, hey, you got to get in shape in some form or fashion. So there is readiness that is technical expertise, big question. That gets to immigration. There is the readiness of just basic manufacturing labor, which gets to other societal questions.
Right, so what do we do to change that mix?
Well, I think immigration, to me, immigration, and it was the point in my speech where I lost a couple of pages, so you didn't hear my whole immigration speech. It's probably on the back of my trade speech. But immigration really does offer the most growth potential of any single set of actions we can take. It is how this country was built. There's a lot of engineering talent that wants to live here. Our most fundamental strength is our openness and our culture. They want to come here, they want to work, and we don't let them. And it's all this partisan infighting. And so the single most important thing, if what you're worried about is moving up the value chain in our manufacturing capability, whether it's Google, Apple, or a big manufacturing place like Boeing, is getting some of that technical talent into this country legally. And right now it's tough.
Switching over from just to the regulatory process, I saw something that said that where both you and the FAA said that the certification process for the 787 could have been handled better. Just in general, given regulatory oversight and the approval, I mean, how do you improve that process to keep pace with what are fast-changing technological innovations?
Well, I think I'd broaden the answer a little bit. I mean, the aerospace industry in general is, and this is the right number, 10 times safer than it was 30 years ago. Okay? So I would characterize the interaction between the regulators and the people who design and produce technology, that would be us, as an unbelievable success story. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, we can make it better, and and one of the reasons it got 10 times better is because it did get better, and I think that comment centered around the battery issue on the 787, where we had a piece of technology that wasn't as stable as we thought, and which essentially got down to some manufacturing control and some design issues. And I don't blame people for saying, hey, how come the regulatory process and the certification process didn't pick this up? Well, there's part of the answer also is that there was so much redundancy on that airplane. If that battery had blown up every time it got into flight, it wouldn't have impacted the safety of the airplane. But that's not the way it looks. Okay, mm-hmm. So we can make it better, and we're working with the FAA to make it better.
Switch gears a little bit. Look at your rocket business. 2 years ago, Elon Musk spoke here at the club, actually in April 2 years ago. What are your thoughts on privatization of space exploration and ultimately the implications for your launch business?
I think it's a good thing. I mean, I think, there's been no industry in the history of the world that didn't move from, that didn't hive as it technically matured, that didn't hive out of whether government supported or some other form of support into a more conventional commercial type business. I think launching a rocket is something that Elon, he can do with his company, as he's proving. It can do it cheaper, therefore he should compete. Now, we're going to end up doing the high-end systems, the things, we're producing the big rockets that are going to go interplanetary and solar system and carry human beings on it. And so they'll still, the market will sort of separate into bringing stuff back and forth to the shuttle, which is a very important, to the space station, I should say, which is a very important capability for our country to have. But there'll also be a high-end thing that we'll be able to compete with and compete in very effectively.
So is it right that today you and Lockheed launch all the government satellites today?
Yes.
So will that space ultimately be opened up to competitors?
Yes,
will they be able
yes, and it should be, I mean, I think we're on contract for X number of launches over the next few years, and then I think if a commercial competitor can demonstrate lower cost, just as effective, we'll either choose to compete with them in that segment, or we'll move on to other segments or other businesses. But I think that guy's doing a hell of a job, to be honest with you. I thought I heard an echo when I came in here today. That was probably his comments still reverberating here. Yeah. He was a very persuasive guy.
Yes. He was very good here.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your talk the Export-Import Bank and the
Yes.
desirability of re-upping on the charter there. I guess to my simple way of thinking, aren't we just financing, from a U.S. standpoint, aren't we just financing competitors overseas to come in with low-cost financing and compete with our U.S. airlines?
Ask the question again.
Well,
Say it one more time.
from an Export-Import Bank standpoint,
Yeah.
Boeing's about half the loans that have gone out of the Export-Import Bank.
Not quite.
About 40,
That's the apocryphal number.
about 44, 45%.
A little bit less, but
Okay.
a lot. Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
Right. So isn't that just some form of low-cost financing
I
for
see.
foreign competitors to come in and compete with Jeff Smizek and a couple other airlines we have here?
Well, nobody can compete with Jeff Smizek. Okay, so I mean, so let's just start right there. Look, these loans are actually very expensive. Okay, this is about availability of credit, not cheap credit. So just to use the example, when someone from India buys an airplane from us and gets an EXIM guarantee, that's much more expensive than a major airline borrowing money in the United States to buy an airplane that competes with that Indian airplane. So that one doesn't wash in the real world.
Well, except in the real world, if they can't get the financing, then they're not competitive, and they can't do it.
Yeah, I mean,
now you've created a competitor that wasn't going to exist in the real world otherwise.
Well, I understand that argument, but that's jobs, and that's a lot of negative consequences to the United States. What they will do is they'll buy an airplane. If we cut it off, they'll buy an airplane from Europe, Canada, or South America, and America will both have lost the business, and United Airlines will still be competing against somebody who got a EXIM type loan to support them. That's the unilateral disarmament piece of my argument.
Technology going forward, I don't think I want to fly in a plane without a pilot, but pilots are most of the source of error. Are we going to see either passenger planes or pilotless cargo planes in the near future?
Well, I think you'll see military applications. You're already beginning to see it, but I don't think the American consumer is ready for that. So I think it's that simple. And we can demonstrate that they're as safe and they're as reliable. That doesn't matter. You know, who's up? Who? Mabel? Who? You know. Just isn't going to happen for a while.
So even in the military application piece of it, as the planes essentially are now controlled electronically and by someone else,
Yeah.
are we going to worry more about cybersecurity and whether those planes can ultimately get controlled by someone here on their PC at home?
Well, those systems tend to be pretty hardened, those ones that fly drones and things like that. I think the cyber threat to this country is more our financial services industry, infrastructure, and the basic, our intellectual property. And that gets down to systems that control everything from bridges to wire transfers of banks to the information in Boeing's research and development laboratories. Those are the places where we have vulnerability and where as most everyone in this room knows tonight, there's a lot of activity that's ongoing all the time.
Switching topics, talking a bit about leadership, and you've got a lot of experience across different multinational companies, GE, 3M, Boeing. How do you compare those cultures organizationally, and in your view, kind of what have you seen at those different organizations that works and what doesn't?
Well, I mean, each culture is different, although I often say that my job at 3M was to herd 60,000 chemical engineers, and I just traded that in for a job where I herd 90,000 aerospace engineers, and that's about the same when you get right down to the herding task. I don't say that joke to my engineers, by the way, and any Boeing people here, you know not to repeat that. Listen, every corporate culture is different. Everybody knows that, and GE's was a little harder edged. Boeing's is a little more aspirational, change the world, which is wonderful. But ultimately, you get down to running a business, and ultimately that gets down to developing leaders that can take technology, transform them into products, and satisfy customers. That's the same in any company, and so what I've tried to focus on in my circumstances generally has been leadership development, broadly defined. Okay, we have all kinds of functional training for engineers and finance people, and for all the functional capability we've got, and we hire from the world's best schools to have good raw material to work with. But at the end of the day, the thing, if you look back through Boeing's history, or 3M or GE's, the thing that tended to go wrong was there was some misjudgment of risk, there was some misjudgment of reward, there was some misjudgment of how people could work together, function. It's more the general management failure. I mean, you could look at the 787 and say that we didn't integrate a lot of the risk elements into a business equation that made sense, and on paper made sense. But again, the judgment of a general manager is the thing, particularly in high-tech industries, is important. And so I focus on that, developing general management leadership capability.
So when you look around at people who you surround yourself with, as you try and develop those people, what kind of traits or attributes do you look for?
Well, we have our definition. One of the things I did when I first got to Boeing was we spent a year and a half defining what a leader meant. And that took a year and a half because, we had people in Seattle had a list of 35.
So I'd like to know the answer. We are probably going to run out of time before you finish, a year and a half. But
no, but my point was going to be, and I'll make it, I can take a hint, where those missed pages when I need them, right? I think my point was that leadership can be defined in a lot of different ways. The important thing is to define it. And that's very hard to do. And it involved, in my case, a year and a half with the Boeing team trying to figure out what it meant. Mm-hmm. Now we have 6 things that we measure ourselves on. Leadership, it's a routine part of our evaluation of people. Your list might be a little different, but we've all bought in. All 170,000 people know that this is what it is. They participated in it, and we're going to live by it. And that's the hard part. That's the hard part. The actual wording in the list is less important.
So in addition to the companies that you've run or obviously been involved with in senior management, you've also served on the boards of IBM, P&G. What have you learned from being on other boards?
Well, they learned a ton from me.
That goes without saying.
Yeah. Tell us again about the 787, Jim. Tell us that story. No, I think, again, it's the ability to see, it's ultimately the ability to analogize across different situations. And I think every problem has been seen before, and the more different industries you see and the more different problems you see, that your ability to analogize into your own business or in other business situations is increased. And so I think that tends to be the benefit. That, and one of the common challenges in big companies is, and I would just mention one thing, is insularity. Huge challenge. Big challenge at Boeing. It's and insularity is the thing that eventually gets you, because insularity eventually makes things inside your company more important than things outside your company. Whether it's evaluating people, or whether it's the tolerance of diversity of thought or diversity of anything, whether it's the flow of ideas in your company. And insularity is the thing that guys in my job have got to fight against. And that's hard to do because your cultures are strong, they have produced success. And so, Jim, tell me again why we got to do this all differently What are you talking about? Didn't you see our earnings yesterday? Yeah, and I'm more worried about the earnings 5 years from now. And so insularity is a big battle. And if you want me to go on, I could on insularity, but I think you got the basic idea.
So let's move a little closer at home. Chicago, you mentioned in your talk that you moved here from Seattle 13 years ago. Why Chicago? And if you were making the decision again today, would you make the same decision?
I think it was it was made before I got here, but I think it was a good choice. I think why is Canberra the capital of Australia? It's because Sydney and Melbourne can't be. Okay, you can't award, so you got to find a neutral spot. You got to find a place closer to Washington than Seattle. So, Seattle was too separated from the action in D.C., and whether you like it or not, what Washington, D.C. does is very important to our company, and you have to participate in it. And so the fact that I'm an hour and 20 minutes away from D.C. is important. But also you want a place that produces high-quality people and has a business infrastructure and has a family friendliness about it, and where people will want to come live and work for your outfit. So it's a balancing of all those things that produced Chicago. Turns out it was a great choice. It was a great choice. We're very happy here.
So one of the things, obviously we've got the new Digital Manufacturing and Design
Yes.
Innovation Center, which you mentioned in your
Yep.
talk, and you're one of the commercial partners there.
Yep.
What are you contributing, and what do you expect to get out of it?
Well, we're contributing money to begin with, and
Good thing.
Like a number of people in the room are. I think, look, what this is trying to become is a focal for advanced manufacturing technology, and we are a big-time manufacturing operation. So, engaging with community as well as educational institutions and other companies in sort of a IP-free environment where you can focus on technical development, and there are rules about what you can take and can't take, and I think that's a good thing. And there's a revolution that's going to happen in manufacturing in this country. It's not just automation. Automation is yesterday. This is all about printing and advanced forms of designing and forming parts that have a 10x cost advantage, versus the way we're doing things today. So this is a big idea.
So will the Institute be a game changer for Chicago or for the Midwest?
I think it has a chance to be. I think it becomes a game changer when there's good engagement between the educational environment and real companies doing real things. And I think this has a chance to do it. And
So-
we're gonna try to participate and aid in that process.
What else does Chicago need to do to remain competitive, as this piece moves forward? I mean, particularly in the
Well, I think
high-tech manufacturing.
I think I give Ram credit, to be honest. I mean, I think he's focused on education, and he's focused on education at the sort of the community college, industry relevant level. And there have been a few states that have done that well, and he's using that model. He's trying to get help from us. I remember sitting in the mayor's office with Jeff one time. We were having a discussion with him about one of his focal areas. So education that's relevant to tomorrow's workforce is a big thing he's gotten right. I think this advanced manufacturing thing, and then creating a city with infrastructure and attracting other business. I give him an A for attracting other business. I mean, tough to say no to him, so I just avoid him, because he's going to ask me for something. So I really do give the mayor credit for that, and I would even tell him to his face that.
So a couple final questions looking to the future. Most everybody in this audience is a frequent business traveler. How is business travel going to look different 10 years from now?
It won't look dramatically different. I mean, you'll see...
Food be better?
Well, Jeff is available in 2 months to sit right here and answer that question. No, I think I think you'll see a flow out of a number of the new technologies that are going to airplanes. The obvious composites that make airplanes lighter and more efficient, carry better pressure differentials to make bigger windows because the material is stronger than aluminum, and so you'll be more comfortable on the flight. Engines will be made increasingly out of ceramics and other composite materials. It can handle the heat even better than nickel alloys, which has been the flavor of the last 5 decades in jet engines. And so it'll be more incremental advances in lightness and strength of materials used to build these things that will impact fuel efficiency, that will enable smaller, medium-sized airplanes to go farther places, to go a long way, so that more frequently you can go to and from places. You won't have to go through big hubs. So it'll be a change more like, the analogy is distributed computing. You know, it used to be computers were all big Hummers 40 years ago, and now everybody's got a Hummer on their desk, okay? So it'll be more distributed capability in one form or another, enabled by the technologies that will continue to find their way into airplanes. But not a dramatic, you know, you're not going to be flying around in, you know, you're not going to be going into space and then landing at LAX.
Okay, so in our lifetime, we're not going to see another fast Concorde-like plane?
Well, it could be. Some of these materials could enable that. The problem with the Concorde was it was too expensive, and you couldn't charge a ticket price. You couldn't find enough people to get on it for, I forget what it was, 3X first class. I forget what it was, but it was. And I think when the planes, you could see another swing at a supersonic plane in another 10 or 15 years, now that the costs are in line. So.
Okay, Jim, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate you spending the time and talking to us.
You did a good job.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.